And one final thing to say before I invite John up, in case you are wondering, this really is John Wyatt.
Well, is it?
Not a robot, not a deep fake or a hologram. Can we please give a round of applause to John Wyatt?
But how do you know for sure? So that's the big question that one of the big questions that we'll be looking at. It's a real pleasure for me to be here, and I'm going to be talking about this topic. I'm going to go quite fast. I'm going to cover quite a wide area. Right from the beginning, I want to say, if you've come tonight expecting some nice, slick, simple answers to complicated problems, you're going to be very disappointed, because I haven't got any nice, slick, simple answers. In fact, I don't think there are any nice, slick, simple answers. But I hope together we can think about the challenge that is facing us. You know, we live in an absolutely remarkable time. Many historians of science and technology think that people will look back to this time as an extraordinary inflection point, the point at which artificial intelligence really took off with completely, at the moment, unpredictable consequences. So how can we think about these questions? What are the issues? As I say, I'm going to move fast, but if there are particular topics and things that you'd like to discuss in greater detail, please use the Slido, and we'll have the chance to go in later on. So, very quickly, AI is already here, and whether you know it or not, you are using it, and it is using you. Every time you go onto the internet, every time you do a search through Google, every time you open your smartphone, AI is activated, and it's part of the hidden infrastructure of our lives already. GPS is a classic example. It's AI which not only finds the satellites circulating in space, calculates the position, and then calculates the route to your route. What many people don't know is that when you just go onto a website, many commercial websites, an extraordinary sequence of events happens. The first thing that happens is that the website identifies who you are by using the various computer codes in your, however you've come, so smartphone, laptop, iPad, however. The next thing that happens is that computers, having worked out who you are, immediately download your entire internet shopping history, everything you ever bought online, and using that information, as well as lots of other information that are stored on you, it then calculates how much you're worth, how much you tend to spend on particular items, and so on. The next thing that happens is that information is now shared across the world with a whole number of separate artificial intelligences. And then what happens is a bidding war starts when between these different internet agents, in order to decide who is going to have the right to put the advert onto your screen that you are just trying to load. And that bidding war continues until eventually one or a small group of these agents bid the highest price. And at that point, the screen loads and the adverts that were paid for load up on your screen. And that whole thing can happen within a tenth of a second or less. I recently went onto a website, and it was quite interesting because it was a bit slow. It started to put up a whole load of clickbait adverts, and then suddenly the screen cleared, and I got this whole thing about smart meters. And so basically the systems had worked out that I was a homeowner, that I potentially paid quite large sums, and I didn't have a smart meter for gas. It knew all that, and therefore that was the adverts that were displayed on my screen. So just a simple example of what is going on of which most of us are completely unaware. Every time we get into a car, automatic number plate recognition is working out who you are, then checking the databases. Have you paid your road tax? Are you wanted for any crimes? And as for an example, for many of us now, even walking into our offices and commercial places, if you walk into retail organizations, shops, facial recognition will spring into action, will work out who you are and whether you have a criminal history, whether you're supposed to be in this building, and so on. And facial recognition, this is just a view across an airport. Every single person there is identified and being tracked by AI systems. So these systems are already in operation. They're in operation here in the UK. They're in operation around the world. And a lot of what they're doing is incredibly sophisticated pattern recognition. And pattern recognition turns out to be something that's incredibly valuable in all kinds of areas of enterprises. It's extremely valuable and will become increasingly valuable in medicine, for diagnosis, medical image analysis. This is a CT scan of lung, and using an AI system which was designed to diagnose COVID pneumonia, and turned out to be as good, if not better, than the most experienced human beings. A very exciting area where AI is being used is in drug development. And the whole process of drug development, which used to be an extremely inefficient, expensive, and wasteful procedure where human beings had to guess which molecules, of all the possible molecules, to identify a target molecule and then test in laboratory trials, eventually then have a clinical trials and so on. And we're already starting to see the impact of AI in drug discovery. And an AI program based at MIT was trained using about 2,500 molecules, all of which were known to have antibacterial properties. And the researchers then tested the program on a library of 6,000 compounds about which nothing was known in terms of their antibacterial activity. And the program picked out one molecule that was predicted to have strong antibacterial activity and had a chemical structure different from any existing antibiotics. This molecule has since been shown to be highly effective in laboratory tests, experimental animals, and has already entered clinical trials. It's called halicin. And for those of you who know anything about science fiction, HAL is the computer in 2001 Space Odyssey, which went rogue. And so in the very name, there is a reference to the possibility of something going wrong. But this is an extraordinarily powerful new way of identifying potentially life-saving and transformative drugs. So having identified this one molecule, halicin, the program was then used to screen more than 100 million molecules. Imagine what that would take for human beings to go through libraries of 100 million different molecules, trying to work out which one to test. This screen, which took only 3 days, identified 23 candidate molecules, and in laboratory tests, the researchers found that 8 of the molecules showed antibacterial activity and 2 were particularly powerful. So I think this kind of incredibly sophisticated and powerful AI system is already making waves in science, in medicine, and it will continue to do so in many, many places. And I'm extremely grateful and excited about what the potential is for this kind of technology. So that's a form of AI often described as machine learning, which is particularly a kind of pattern recognition. But where the greatest buzz and excitement is very recently is something different, which is called generative AI. And this is the possibility of AI systems that can actually create based on analysis of huge databases, they can create new data. And the one most of us are aware about is ChatGPT, described as a large language model, and which can generate vast amounts of text. But actually, the same fundamental principles can generate, as it says here, voice, images, video, computer code, music, and architectural designs. There's almost no limit to what these things are able to generate ab initio from new. And this is having an extraordinary impact. Generative AI is having an extraordinary impact already. ChatGPT, which was launched at the end of 2022, was the fastest growing app in the history of web applications. This is the path to 1 million users. Spotify on the right took 150 days, Instagram 75 days, ChatGPT 5 days to 1 million users. It's now had over 1 billion visits. I think it's having over 1 billion visits every month, and is having an impact across the world. If you know anything about education, both high school education and university, tertiary level education, these programs are already transforming the nature of education because you can generate endless amounts of articles using very simple prompts on any topic. And so the whole problem about plagiarism is a vast problem. There is no reliable way at the moment of detecting whether any essay, any dissertation, any scientific paper, any book, novel, whether it's been generated by a human being or whether it's been generated by an AI program or some combination of the two. And many people are feeling that traditional writing, for instance, is going to be a lost art, and the main thing is we're all going to have to learn how to curate and develop and modify and edit the text which is generated by these systems. There's no doubt that healthcare is going to be one of the places where we see the impact greatest, and it's one of the things which fascinates me is the contrast between the current technology when it comes to other areas of consumables compared with health. So if living in London, if I want to order a particular gadget, small piece of hardware or something like that, I can do that through one of the big online web platforms, and the system is able to choose out of literally millions and millions and millions of possible things sitting in warehouse exactly the right one and deliver it to my door, often in less than 24 hours, on the same day that I typed it in. And yet, when it comes to the dear NHS, and I want to find the results of a blood test, or an X-ray, or to get some simple information transferred from one hospital to another clinic or something like that, it's a complete and utter disaster. So just imagine if the NHS was able to work with the same level of efficiency as Amazon or any of the other large online platforms. Just imagine how that would transform healthcare. If that accuracy and efficiency, that logistical skill, and there's absolutely no reason in principle why that can't happen, and I suspect it is going to happen, for good or ill. Certainly, this is what's happening in the States. Healthcare is such an enormous market in the States that it is being targeted by many of the big tech companies as the number one target for their systems because of the vast profits that could be made. And as so often happens, things that first develop in the States will come across the pond and will start increasingly being used here as well. So a lot of people, this is a vision of how healthcare is going to be in the future. And so over here is you and me, and we are completely riddled with health monitoring wearable tech, so that sort of simple things like smartwatches and Fitbits are just the very first version of what's going to come, and is already coming. So all those kind of sensors are collecting information continuously, 24 hours, 7 days a week, from our bodies. They are then being sent, often using smartphones or others, into the cloud, onto the internet, where they're being then analyzed, and AIs are constantly checking for patterns of all this wearable data which is going up into the cloud. And then occasionally a human being, as a medical doctor or a nurse, and if they decide you're about to have a heart attack, they'll send an ambulance. And so this is the American vision of how healthcare is going to be. And I suspect it's probably prophetic. A lot of this is going to happen. And one of the big advantages is said that it puts power away from the medical professionals and on into you, the patient, us. We're the ones who are in control of the data, and we're the ones who decide, because our smartphone is telling us what our cholesterol level is, what our heart rate's doing, the fact that there's something being picked up funny with your kidneys or whatever. And then we can decide. We are in control. Of course, as so often, what happens in medicine, this is the most amazing opportunity for the worried well, the people who basically have nothing wrong with them and spend the whole time staring at the smartphone and worrying about their heart rate or about their cholesterol level, whatever. Whereas the people who really need this, you can guarantee won't have it, or it won't be working, or it'll be switched off, or whatever. So the worry is that a lot of this technology is going to have exactly the wrong. It's going to focus a great deal of attention on the people who don't really need it, and that so many of the people who really need it are going to miss out. And healthcare is just one example of how AI and this level of automation is going to disrupt employment. So what seems to happen as AI develops in a particular field is the tasks that any job. So previously, what a doctor did, what a lawyer does, what an accountant does, what a businessman does, etc., these things were a kind of integrated whole. What happens now is that what each of those job roles is broken down into a series of tasks, and then those tasks are analyzed to see, why does a human being need to do this? Wouldn't it be better to outsource this particular task to machines or to automation? And so some people call this the disintegration of traditional roles. And I think this is definitely going to happen in healthcare. I think the traditional roles of doctors, nurses, paramedics, and so on are going to be disintegrated into other things. So we're going to have specialists in healthcare informatics, database management, AI development. Yes, we'll have a few human beings and a few medically trained physicians and so on, but increasingly a lot of what they do is going to be outsourced. And the same is going to be happening. It's almost impossible to imagine a profession which isn't going to be, some kind of occupation which isn't going to be disrupted in some way. But what is so extraordinary is that really nobody can predict exactly how it is going to. You know, if your child were to ask you, what is the best occupation to go into where I could have, the least chance that I'm going to be disrupted by this technology? It's certainly not anything at all intellectual. Intellectual activities are the most vulnerable. The sort of thing I would recommend would be hairdressing or being a plumber, because those kind of things are probably going to be the hardest for the technology to get. But even then, it's only a matter of time before robotic plumbers are around. So the technology is new, it's powerful, it's ubiquitous, it's rapidly advancing. But I think it's important to understand that behind this shiny, glossy surface, it's very, very old power. The power structures in which this technology is embedded are very old, and they're very powerful. And what is driving this extraordinary explosion that we're now seeing in AI technology is very old-fashioned capitalism. It's what the economists call laissez-faire capitalism, which is basically there is no regulation to speak of, and we have got a series of extremely powerful, extremely wealthy companies with vast amounts of shareholder investment invested in them, including many people here, pensions and other things, are all invested in the tech companies. And these tech companies are involved in a fight to the death to be the one that wins out with the AI. And it feels to me almost like an eerie recapitulation of the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was the extraordinary focus of human ingenuity, technology, money in the Second World War, which was spearheaded by the American state in order to create a nuclear bomb. There was such fear that Hitler was ahead of the race in terms of making a nuclear bomb. And so basically, what happened is, in the Manhattan Project, you have the best possible scientists, you give them unlimited budgets, you give them the entire technological capacity, industrial capacity of the United States, and you say, solve this problem. And as we all know, they solved this problem in the sense, and they created a problem. They created atomic weapons. It then turned out, of course, that Hitler was miles behind. And if the Manhattan Project hadn't taken place, it might have taken decades before atomic weapons actually became available. And it feels to me like the same, almost a similar thing is happening now, but it's not driven by state power, it's driven by capitalism. But in the same way, what's happening is get the very best scientists, give them unlimited budgets, get the very best machines we can possibly have, and then say, solve this problem, make an AI which has unlimited intelligence. Because if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it. And it's both within the West, competition within the West, but there's also a geopolitical element because there is huge fear about China in particular, but also some other states, Russia, North Korea, and so on, also involved in AI races. And therefore, we cannot afford not to be pushing forward on this. So in the remarkably prescient words of C.S. Lewis, written at the end of the Second World War, he said, man's power over nature turns out to be power exerted by some men over other men. And I think we're seeing that afresh. Of course, the language is very dated, but the sentiment is very up to date. So where does the UK fit in this ecosystem? We've got enormous power going on in Silicon Valley and in the States. We've got enormous power in China. Where does Europe, and in particular, where does the UK fit? And it seems that the UK is positioning itself as the place that does safety and regulation. We are only minnows, but we are punch above our weight in terms of understanding safety, understanding regulation. And so Bletchley Park held the AI Safety Summit back in November 23. And just very briefly, I think you can see 3 levels of risk that are coming from the latest generation of these extremely powerful generative AI models. The first is the problem of what's hidden in the training data. Because these systems are trained on huge and mind-boggling amount of data, which trawled out from the internet. Interestingly, this is now thought of as an extractive industry. So extractive industries used to be things like mining and getting elements out of the planet, and now this is an extractive industry which is extracting out of all the vast amounts of data which we're pursuing, extracting the solid gold which we can use. And the problem is that training data is filled with bias, with prejudices, with errors, with all kinds of evil things hidden within the training data. And then secondly, there are risks from malevolent individuals using this powerful technology for malign purposes. And it turns out that these language models are extremely sophisticated when it comes to persuasion and pseudo-intimacy. They can come across in this extraordinarily intimate way. And I haven't time to go into a number of examples. Many of us heard about the fake Biden robocall, where apparently President Biden rang up voters in New Hampshire and told them, don't bother voting. And of course, it was a fake, but apparently an extremely ingenious and well-crafted one. Fake videos are very common, so-called deep fakes, and I've heard it said, people have said they think it's very likely that there's going to be a major war break out sooner or later because of deep fake videos. As these things become so sophisticated, the possibility of confusion and generation of conflict and hate is extraordinary. But then the third level of risk is a theoretical risk from the machines themselves developing autonomy, and as they become more and more powerful, they start to pursue goals which are not aligned with human goals. They start to do their own thing rather than doing things which we want them to do. And this is now called the alignment problem, how to ensure that the AI's goals are aligned with our human goals. And this is a very major problem, and it's one that some of the best brains in this field are wrestling with. And fundamental to their concerns, there is a great deal of concern about the possibility that a rogue AI could start to take on its own value systems and its own goals. And this is Stephen Hawking speaking before his sad death some years ago. Intelligence is central to what it means to be human. Everything that our civilization has achieved is a product of human intelligence. From learning to master fire, learning to grow food, understanding the cosmos. I believe there is no deep difference between what can be achieved by a biological brain and what can be achieved by a computer. It therefore follows that computers can, in theory, emulate human intelligence and exceed it. So if everything, all our uniqueness, what is the difference between a human being and a chimpanzee? Why have human beings been so successful on the planet and chimpanzees by and large haven't? Why have we got the chimpanzees in zoos or controlling them in forests and they haven't got us in zoos? And Hawking would say, well, it's all about intelligence. And that's our unique feature as human beings. Everything unique we've ever done is because of intelligence, and now computers can do it as well. And the scary thing is that there appears to be no physical limit to the processing power of information technology. So in any other kind of technology, physics always gets in the way and stops it from getting more and more powerful. So if you're trying to build a steam engine, there comes a point when you simply can't make it bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, it will destroy by its own weight. The same with rockets, the same with all kinds of physical technology. But when you're dealing with ones and noughts, there doesn't seem to be any physical limit to how powerful this technology can become. And that's making some people very frightened. So this, believe it or not, is a diagram which I've copied from a book written by an Oxford professor called Superintelligence. And along the horizontal axis, we have the level of intelligence. So this is the intelligence of a mouse. This is a chimpanzee. This is the so-called village idiot, the human being who's not that very clever. And this is the intelligence of Einstein. So everybody sitting in this room, your intelligence comes somewhere in this little range, and I leave it to you to decide whether you're closer to the village idiot or to Einstein. But the problem is, what happens when a super intelligent machine is created that comes somewhere out here? Do we think that this machine out here is going to be terribly interested in what happens to human beings any more than human beings are terribly interested in what happens to mice? And that is the fear that is driving the concerns about superintelligence. And as you may know, last year Elon Musk and others called for a pause on AI development because of profound risks to society. That wasn't successful. I think the forces of industry, capitalism, were far more powerful than the idea that we should put a hold on everything. And of course, people said, then what about the Chinese, and what about our competitors? And some conspiracy theory said Elon Musk was only doing it because his own AI system was behind the rest, and if he could persuade other people to have the pause, then he would get ahead. So he's a remarkable man, Elon Musk, and one of the other things he said, that as these computers become more and more powerful, human beings must merge with the machines. Otherwise, we're going to become irrelevant. We're going to become like the mice. And so he's created a company called Neuralink, which is completely dedicated to implanting electrodes inside people's brains in order to link them up with computers. And he's already got a prototype, and has got approval from American authorities, and is about to start clinical trials. This is a classic example of what's called dual-use technology. You can use this technology for astonishing good in healthcare. So people who've got severe paralysis, motor neuron disease, spinal cord damage, a lot of other kind of conditions, being able to control devices simply by thought alone would be extraordinarily powerful, valuable, restorative technology. But the very same technology can be used in military applications for soldiers to control apparatus. And surprise, surprise, both the US military, in fact, militaries around the world, are putting a huge amount of emphasis and research into ways of connecting brains and AI systems. And this leads to a kind of horrific vision of what the soldier of the future might look like with implanted technology, so that they are blend with their equipment, and they're able to fire simply by thought. They're able to select targets. And the goal, of course, is that 1 of ours should be worth 10 of theirs. And the only way we can do that is with technology. So there's a vast technological arms race going on using AI and other advanced technology. How much of this is real, and how much of this is just science fiction? And that, I think, is a very interesting and an area which I don't think has enough attention in this field. If you look back in the history of technology, what's happened previously is that there's been a technological advance, the technology has happened, and then along come the creative writers and the artists, and they write about the technology that's happened. What's happened with AI and robotics is completely unique, because we have had more than 100 years of authors, movie makers, playwrights, and so on, speculating about what would happen if you had intelligent machines, if you had robots. Every possible plot line has been explored and published. What's very interesting, particularly about American science fiction, is how frequently dystopian it is. If you're reading a science fiction story and then the computers become more intelligent than the human beings, you know it's not going to end well. It's almost by definition, it's all going to go horribly wrong because the computers are getting more clever. Now, the fascinating thing is that most of the pioneers, the tech people in America and elsewhere, are completely immersed in science fiction. They've been immersed in science fiction since they were 4 or 5. They've been reading this stuff, they're completely absorbed with it, and they are trying to make it come true. And there are many examples of that where they've actually said that's precisely what the reason is. The reason Elon Musk is terribly keen on getting to Mars is because that's what he read in the science fiction. That was the only way to avoid extinction of the planet, and therefore he's saying, I'm going to make that come true. The whole idea of Neuralink is also a science fiction idea of implanting electrodes over the brain that would allow, that was a science fiction idea invented by several authors, including Neil Stephenson. Apparently, Alexa's voice, and those of you who know Alexa and speak to her, Alexa's voice was designed to be exactly the same as the voice on the computer in Star Trek. So that calm voice, while the photon torpedoes are coming in and all the rest, that calm voice behind that is telling you what to do, that's Alexa, and Alexa was designed to have the same resonance. So there's this extraordinary sort of interaction between science fiction and what's actually happening. And I think part of the reason why people are so frightened about rogue superintelligence is science fiction. It's because this is such a frequent plot line in science fiction. It's as though the technologists have been saying, we're really trying to make this science fiction come true. Oh, hang on a minute, I've just remembered how it ends. and how much of it is genuinely true is debatable. So what's fascinating to me is that if you adopt what tends to be called now physicalism. Physicalism says there is nothing in the universe except matter and energy. And everything else is built out of matter and energy. What that means, therefore, is that our brains are simply composed of matter and energy. And therefore, that every single thing that's ever come out of the human brain, not both wonderful things like cathedrals and Mozart and whatever your most wonderful thing is, but also horrific things like Hitler and Pol Pot and torture and masochism and all the rest. Everything that's ever come out of the human brain is simply a product of wiring. It's simply a product of bits firing away. And therefore, why should we think that if we have computers which are reproducing what goes on in the brain, why should we think that something terribly evil can't come out of them? And what's more, what we know about human evil is it doesn't always come along with a little label saying, oh, by the way, I am evil. In fact, human evil often seems to be incredibly subversive and manipulative and disguised. And so how do we know that these superintelligent systems aren't also going to be manipulative and subversive? So fascinatingly, physicalism, if you're a physicalist, you have a reason to be very frightened because in the end, it's just matter and energy. What about consciousness? Is it ever possible that one of these things is going to become conscious? And here we really go down a very deep rabbit hole because the truth is there's absolutely no way we will ever know whether this thing is conscious or not. And this is what philosophers call the problem of other minds. I don't even know whether you are conscious. I mean, you're sitting there and you're smiling and moving around, but for all I know, your minds could be completely blank. In fact, as I look at you, I wonder. But so that's the problem. You can never know what someone else is experiencing. And if that's true of human beings, what on earth are we going to do when the computer says, I am conscious? How are we going to test? How do we ever know whether this is just clever programming or whether there actually is something, some kind of sentience, some kind of awareness? Some people are suggesting we're going to have committees of the great and the good, and any time a program comes and claims to be conscious, they're going to have to be assessed by these committees to work out whether or not they meet the criteria to be graded as conscious. If they are graded as conscious, then all of a sudden we have to give them rights. We have to protect them from harm. We have to say we're not going to switch you off unless you request it. We're not going to work you too hard. We're not going to cause you suffering or pain. So we're going to have to give you machine rights. Again, how much of this is science fiction? How much of this is true? I think it's coming, and I think I can just see a whole load of further confusions down the line. Behind all this is anthropomorphism, a long word, anthropomorphe, which just means to see a human form in a non-human being. It's our ability to see something that is actually not human, but treat it as though it was human. It's a universal human tendency, and the fascinating thing is we cannot control it. You cannot control whether you anthropomorphize. It just happens instantaneously inside our minds. It's part of our humanity. It brings profound benefits, but at the same time, it renders us open to manipulation and deception. And what's happening is the technologists are trying to create devices which will draw us into anthropomorphism. In fact, it's already happening. Our working and personal lives are becoming increasingly infiltrated by simulated persons. Just one example, Wobot, I love the name, is a software program designed for people with depression and with other mental health activities. You have it on your smartphone, and basically it's a friendly person who's there 24/7. And so just to take a random interaction where someone was asked how you're feeling, so in blue is the human being, better, and the thing says, that's really great news, nice work. It looks like this is a useful technique for you. Shall I add it to your toolbox? So this is being used for cognitive behavioral therapy. That way you can access it at any time to bust your anxiety. Yes, boom, done. Remember, you can access your toolbox at any time by typing toolbox. So the idea is you can have a companion with you 24/7, always there, friendly, compassionate, empathic, understands you better than anybody else, and always there to give you an encouragement and so on. So here's the digital avatars. Mind-bogglingly, this is now, you can create a digital avatar so that after you die, if all your emails, all your texts, everything you've ever produced is then uploaded into the AI, so that after you die, your avatar will continue to send texts, will continue to respond to emails, to family news. This is now called digital immortality, that you will continue. And it is argued, it helps other people with their grieving and bereavement experience because you're still there and they can still interact with you and you still tell those same old funny jokes and so on and so on. It's not just avatars, of course. Many of us are in the second half of life, and what is being proposed for us is that there are not enough human carers, and what we're going to do is we're going to make your homes absolutely plastered with monitoring devices, cameras, sensors, everything else, and then these will all be analyzed and constantly monitored, and at the same time you can have a robot who will be there to be your companion. So one of the fascinating things about these large language models, it turns out they're particularly good at empathy. So recent studies comparing human doctors with these AI systems have suggested not only are they better at diagnosis, but they're just so much nicer. They're so much more friendly. They're so much more empathic. And they've got plenty of time, and they're always concerned, and they'll always listen to you. So one of the questions we're going to have to ask is, how important is it to have authentic human empathy and compassion? Or if the machine can simulate that so well, does it matter? And so these AI systems are being promoted. The AI companion who cares, always here to listen and talk, always on your side. Replica is one of the leading agents, and some Replica users discovered that they could get the device if they spoke to it in certain ways, they could get it to talk back in a very sexual, explicit way. And so they thought this was really exciting and so on. And And then Replica the company worked out this was going on and changed the software slightly. And then everybody complained, it's no fun anymore. So human compassion can be gamed. It's the ultimate psychological hack, a glitch in human response that can be exploited in an attempt to make a sticky product. That's why designers give AIs human characteristics in the first place. They want us to like them. So in a television series called Westworld, science fiction series, it's based in a theme park which is populated by incredibly sophisticated humanoid robots. And the idea is that real human beings can come into the theme park and can live out their fantasies with these humanoid robots. And according to the series, it turns out that the main fantasies that people have is either having sex with the robots or killing them, because what else would you possibly want to do with a robot? But in one of the early episodes, a human being has just arrived in the theme park, and this beautiful woman comes up to him, and he stares at her, and he says, "Are you real, or are you one of those?" And she says, "If you can't tell, does it matter?" Now, I think that question is a question that's going to haunt us for the next decades. If you cannot tell the difference between what is a genuine human response and what is an absolutely brilliant simulation, does it matter? There are an awful lot of people out there who are going to say, no, it doesn't matter. As long as it has the right effect in you, as long as it motivates, the response you have is the same as if it was human, the fact that it's fake doesn't matter. But I, for one, and I suspect quite a lot of us, would want to say, it does matter. It does matter whether this is authentic. And then the question is then, why does it matter? And how are we going to persuade? One of my nightmare scenarios is, in many situations, you could have this amazingly sophisticated replica, and if you've got a lot of money and you absolutely insist, okay, you can have a real human being, but the rest will get on with the replica. So I'm coming to the end, but I want to flag up two fundamental questions, to step back from it all and say, these are the two fundamental questions which, they're age-old questions, they've been around for thousands of years, but AI raises them with a new urgency. What does it mean to be human in a world that is dominated by intelligent machines? What's the difference? Is there a difference? Does it matter? And secondly, and I think this second question is asked even less than the first, what is the end goal? Where is all this technology aiming? What's the answer what's the end goal? For which this is what's the question for which AI is the answer? What kind of world do we wish to create for our children? So, first question, what does it mean to be human? So, this blurring between the machine and the human is something that I'm very conscious of, and it seems to be happening more and more. One of the interesting things is as the machines become more like humans, the humans become more like machines. When we as human beings are engaging with these AI systems, often we have to adopt a kind of robotic behavior because that's what's expected. That's what the system will respond to. If we just talk naturally, it won't understand us. If we talk like a robot, then it will. But of course, related to that is that so many modern people do understand themselves as just being biological machines. It's interesting, it's even in our language. We talk about people being hardwired, people being programmed, suffering from information overload, needing a data reset. So already we are using this computer language about ourselves. Marvin Minsky, one of the great pioneers of AI, said the brain is a meat machine. That's what we are. We are computers made out of meat. And so artificial intelligence becomes a distorting mirror in which we attempt to understand what it means to be human. Now, I want to push back against that. I say there are aspects of human thinking which are like a computer, the machine is a useful metaphor for some of the ways in which the brain operates. But it's both false and actually incoherent, meaningless, to say that the brain is a computer. We can talk a bit more about that later on if you're interested. So we are not machines. We're each a unique person. And one way of thinking about that is the difference between I-it relationships and I-you relationships. I-it relationships with beings that are impersonal, and I-you relationships where we relate to another person, I and you. Now, I'm just going to try out a bit of philosophy and pictures. So I haven't tried this before, and if it doesn't work, you can tell me. But I'm going to compare and contrast, on the one hand, what I'm going to call the physicalist worldview, and on the other hand, the Christian worldview. So here is the physicalist worldview. What is at the absolute deepest level of reality? And the answer is, for a physicalist, it is this. It is atoms, it is fundamental particles, it is the basic fields of stuff of physics. That is as low as you can get. That is the foundation. Then what happens is these atoms and fundamental particles all get together and they create these things called brain cells. And the brain cells are all created out of those fundamental particles. And the brain cells all start linking up with each other and it gets more and more complicated. And eventually you get to this astonishingly complicated network of brain cells, which is the human brain. And so the human brain somehow, out of all that whirring machinery, develops a kind of awareness. Consciousness is an emergence out of all that activity. Exactly how that works is lots of argument by neuroscientists. But so consciousness is emerging out of this whirring machinery. And then I suddenly discover, hang on a minute, there's another whirring machine over there. And then we can develop some kind of relationship. So the physicalist worldview says the most basic reality is the atoms, and then gradually you work your way up from neurons to brains to relationships. And relationships is the highest level, but it's all based on this fundamental physical reality. Now, how do you illustrate the Christian reality? In order to illustrate the Christian reality, I need to somehow illustrate God Almighty, the being, the mystery of God himself. And the best I could come up with is this picture, which some of you will recognize as a very famous icon painted by a monk, Rublev. And it is an image which represents the triune God of Christianity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And of course, it's a representation. But what the Christian worldview says is that before the Big Bang, before the foundation of the cosmos, there were persons, 3 persons, persons in love, persons in union and communion, giving themselves to one another. And so the Christian worldview, whereas in the physicalist worldview, it's physics, which is the lowest level. In the Christian worldview, it looks something like this. The lowest level, the most fundamental level, is actually personhood. It's persons engaging with one another, and that persons come before the physics. In other words, the I-you relationships are more foundational than the I-it. And then the extraordinary thing is that these people represent these people. These people become an image. And that's why in Christian thinking, that's a kind of illustration of the fact that human beings are made to image the divinity, the divine, the mystery of the 3 in 1. So Christianity teaches us that I-you comes before I-it. And so personhood is a category of reality, to use philosophical term. It's ontologically foundational. Persons are not reducible to matter and energy, and they're not limited to matter and energy. And so in the first chapter of Genesis, as many of you know, in that creation narrative, God says, let us make human beings in our image, in our likeness. So that these human beings that God creates, he creates them as persons to reflect the persons of the Trinity. So human beings are not self-explanatory. The structure of our humanity, the values and the purposes of our lives only make sense because we were created in God's image. And so our human dignity and our significance doesn't come from how well our brains work, from how good our processing power is. It comes from the fact that we actually reflect the reality of God himself. So to be a person, to be made in God's image means that each one of us is a unique person, made for relationship. We're locked in relationships with the natural world, with other human beings, and with the divine itself, himself. To be genuinely free, to have the dignity of choice, creativity, and accountability. And amazingly, to be encoded with longings and dreams for a better world and a better humanity. So, whereas Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum, a Christian version of that would be, you love me, therefore I am. My being doesn't come out of my thinking, doesn't emerge out of what's going on in my conscious awareness. It emerges from the fact that I am in relation, whether I like it or not. I'm loved and held, both in the love of other human beings and ultimately in the love of God himself. So if we go back to this diagram, I want to suggest that the personhood dimension is different from the intelligence dimension. That personhood is a different category. It's not the same as processing power. So however far along this super intelligent machine was, it wouldn't be a person. Only unless God himself chose to give the gift of personhood to that being. That's kind of theological science fiction. So, what does it mean to be human? To be a person, or to be, that's our choice. Are we physical beings simply created out of physics, or do we reflect a deeper reality? And then second, what is the ultimate goal? It's very interesting when you see images of what technologists think the world is going to be like. The future is going to look something like this. We're going to be immersed in these amazing digital 3D digital realities. This is what the city of the future is going to be. The sky is always blue. It's always sunny. There's no litter. It's beautiful. Techno-optimism creates a vision of the future in which human enhancement and intelligent machines enable every aspect of life to be frictionless. Every desire, every longing, every interest will be satisfied instantly, effortlessly, whatever you want to experience, it's there, ping, it's frictionless. Frustration, struggle, boredom, it's all going to go away. We're free to fulfill our wildest dreams with the minimum of effort. But is this a future in which physically embodied human beings can flourish and find their ultimate purpose and fulfillment? And the Disney picture, Wall-E, for those of you who've seen that, it's set in a future where the planet has been completely destroyed by human greed and selfishness. And human beings have migrated into these mega spaceships where they're looked after by robots and AI systems. And all the human beings do at the time is stare at screens and so on. And there's this wonderful comic, but I think quite prophetic vision of what would happen to human beings if they were in an environment which was utterly frictionless. So the bizarre thing is that in order for physical human beings to develop and mature and flourish, it seems that we need resistance, friction, struggle, perseverance, frustration, resilience, pain, suffering. And so I think this vision, this utopia vision of a frictionless future is actually a hell. It's a hell in which human beings will shrivel and become less because we need resistance, we need struggle, we need perseverance. So I'm not pessimistic, though, because the question is, how can this technology be redeemed? That's a Christian word, to take something out of evil and redeem it, to buy it back for good. How can it be brought back from its evil possibilities and used to fulfill its amazing potential, to promote human flourishing, the common good, and the good of creation? And I think this discussion is just starting. This is the discussion we need. This technology is here to stay. We can't wish it away, but by God's grace, it can be redeemed, it can be transformed and used for the good of humanity, not just for evil. So I've finished, but just some preliminary responses. Critical vigilance. AI is changing our world, our understanding of what it means to be human. This is happening, it's happening at extraordinary speed. It does strike me that there's an urgent need for education and information. And I would want to argue that if we wish to be effective citizens and faithful Christians, those of us who are Christian believers, for many of us, AI literacy is becoming essential. Not for everybody, but actually getting informed about the technology, getting informed about what is happening and what the ideas and the potential for the future are. I think a particular focus is on tech workers in the tech industry. Already, tech workers are having quite a powerful influence within the companies. And I think that resourcing and encouraging tech workers are going to be important. And then this concept of co-belligerence, finding other groups, other people, working together with other people of goodwill to restrain evil and enhance the common good. But finally, what I want to finish with, and this is particularly for those of us who are Christian believers, is what God says so frequently in the biblical narrative when something new and frightening happens. His first words are, don't be afraid. We can be confident that God's hidden purposes are being worked out in history in surprising and unexpected ways, and we're all called to be bit players in the great drama. So just to close, there's a book called The Robot Will See You Now. There's some copies at the back here if you want to follow this further. And some of the other books that I've written are also available. I have a website called johnwyatt.com if you're interested in that. And I have a weekly podcast with my son Tim where we discuss matters of life and death, including some of this stuff. Thank you so much for listening.